Hi, and welcome to the second episode of the Great Divide podcast. In this episode, we've got excuse me, we've got Drayton Blackgrove, and he's our first guest on the podcast. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Drayton.
Yeah, hey, well, thank you so much for having me on, Mitchell. It's really cool. This is the first international podcast that I've ever done. I've done other podcasts before for my day job here in the United States, but nothing across the world. So it's amazing that we can join each other here. It's 8:28, or I'm sorry, it's 8:21 a.m. here where I'm at in East Tennessee, and you are 14 hours behind me.
Ahead. It would be
14 hours
what,
ahead.
10:21 p.m. Yep. Yep,
Wow.
we are definitely
Wow.
stretching the technological fibers here.
Yes, it's really amazing, the technology that we have, that we're able to hang out and get to chat with each other all the way across the world. I often think about that, like the the internet, social media has made the hobby even smaller, it seems. It's just interesting because, like, I could have never imagined having a conversation with somebody from Australia 10 years ago about my fake railroad.
Exactly. It's like social media is probably one of the biggest things at the moment that's driven just so much. Like you see a lot of the Facebook groups, while they are mostly American, there's still a lot of international members that you find on there, and there's like these little groups around the place, and it sort of opens it up. And the more you dig, the more you find.
Oh
But it's
yeah.
still through Facebook and forums and stuff that the whole hobby has just sort of exploded in the last almost 2 years, you'd say.
Oh yeah, I would agree. And I think that COVID has kind of played into that. I don't know exactly how things are in Australia. You hear things on the news, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. But
I've heard some
last year,
entertaining things said over there.
I bet. But here in Tennessee, it hasn't been too bad. But just, it varies from state to state. And so, like with my job at Scale Trains, and obviously I'm not speaking on the behalf of the company here in this podcast, but we haven't really been able to connect with our customers and other modelers like we had in the past. And so COVID really, though, has brought us challenges where, we're doing more podcasts, we're doing more live streams and chats on Facebook. And it's really, in some ways, I think it's changed the model railroad industry for the better, because it kind of forces people to connect in new ways and share their hobby in different ways. Like, for instance, like one of the things that Scale Trains went along with last year was this thing called Time to Model. And our thought process was, everybody was in their basements and didn't have the opportunity to, go to their model railroad club, or, go visit friends. And so they had all this time to work on their model trains. And Time to Model was a way for us to connect with our customers, where they could send in articles or send in videos of whatever modeling project they were working on. So, COVID has brought out a lot of really good things about model railroading, and in a lot of unexpected ways. And I'd say, like, meetings like this is one of those unexpected ways. So I'm really happy to be here.
Exactly, and it's almost like part of the way that you could say print media in a way, as we've all seen, like newspapers and that sort of thing, if just nobody's really into that anymore, other than some, excuse me, dyed in the wool magazines that you find around. And with the way that exhibitions, at least in Australia, have been like cancelled, you end up with things that we've seen. I know the NRMA did it, the NRMA X
Mm-hmm.
exhibition, like the virtual sort of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
we've seen just a lot of that really picking up. And even here, it's starting to pick up. I've seen a lot more YouTube channels getting around, a lot of people just sort of talking more of the hobby and what they do in terms of like their modeling. And it goes beyond like the clubs, because we're more of a club and exhibition sort of scene down in Australia. We don't have the luxury of basements, unfortunately.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
a lot of that's sort of grown up around. like getting down to the club, and now these clubs are moving their stuff more online. So you end up with clubs that are having Zoom meetings like this, and that sort of grows out from there. And to me, like just as a non-industry sort of outsider, the way I've sort of watched things is over my 20 years sort of in the hobby, it's gone from the print and going down to the clubs to being online and following everything online, because it's almost so much easier these days to get into the hobby and follow things.
Oh yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, with saying it's a lot easier to find things like, so I'm 25, but I got into the hobby when I was really little. My parents bought me a lifelike model train set, and I absolutely destroyed this train set. I had this little plywood table, and like a lot of us started
I'm not
out
sure
with.
even mine would have survived. Yeah, like the loop of HO track down in Australia, we had a lot of lifelike sets that
Oh
were
yeah.
painted up for local prototypes. Like you get an Australian National F7, for example, and it's like, okay, that's something that's never been here, but it was an easy way to get in, and everything was cheap. Like
Oh yeah.
I saved up my pocket money, I think it was 6 weeks, and I went down and bought another one of those locomotives. And it's just sort of, for me, that was my sort of start in things, but
Yeah,
it's sort of similar to the way most of us seem to get into it.
I think so too, and that's what I was going to say. Like, I'm curious to see how different your upbringing was with the hobby and versus mine, because like I view Australia and England and quite a few of these, like Canada, for instance, like almost like sister countries in a way in the hobby. I mean, we have the common language and
We're
things
all
like that.
colonies, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think there's a lot that we have in common, but there's also a lot of things that are just completely different. And so it's kind of cool to hear your side of things too. But no, when I was getting started, like the only introduction that I had was this big thick catalog from Bachman and also Walthers. And so, you'd have these big catalogs and you get to see all these pictures of these different models and things like that. And it was like, man, I really want a model of this or a model of that. But now, like with Facebook, like there's a lot of really young kids, the ages of 10, 11, 12, 13 that are getting on Facebook and joining these groups. And there's so much more out there. Like when I was little, we didn't really have the internet growing up. Like I was probably 10 or 11 by the time that my parents had a computer in our house that like actually had good internet service. And so like I couldn't just like
the internet wasn't a thing for years down here.
yeah, I mean, I don't know why, but I remember when I discovered eBay, and that was like it was like drugs. I mean, it was like I could look at all these trains and it's like, I want this, I want this, I want this. And so, the internet has really changed the hobby, and I think in a lot of ways for the better. I think model railroading is a very positive hobby. Like I think it's even more positive than actual like train watching or train spot. I don't know what you guys. I call it rail fanning, but even more so than rail fanning, I think it's more positive.
Yeah, there was one of my influences was the Utah Belt, and I think there was an issue in 2006, Model Railroader, and it was right at the start where Eric was talking about an experiment that was done with a monkey, and the treat that it would try the hardest to get was the one that would get it watching the train going past. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting way to look at things, because it's sort of looking at just the primal part of it, and it's just model trains is one of those hobbies where it's not like die-cast cars or something where they sort of sit on a shelf. Like you can actually go out, build yourself something, and watch these little trains run around. And I think that's probably one of the biggest parts of it, is not just the models themselves, but being able to create this little world that runs.
Oh yeah.
I think that's what draws a lot of people into it.
I think so too. I kind of have an interesting theory. So I'm a Christian. I grew up in church, and my grandfather was really who got me into trains, and he was a pastor. And so, having an early upbringing in the church and things like that, and just learning about God as you get older. But one of the things that I always, at least in recent years, have thought about is, like God created us in his image, right? And so, if we're created in God's image and we're to be like God, it's almost natural for us to have this interest in creating our own little world. And so I think that the thing about model railroading that really allows us to explore who we are is, we get to use the best parts of who we are, like, from our imagination to our creativity to our artistic abilities, design abilities, engineering abilities. And I think really model railroading allows us to explore the gifts that God has given us in ways that, other hobbies just don't. Like, when you go out fishing and stuff, for instance, like you're just, flinging the line out there.
Yeah, the end result's the same in a way. Like you're still going to catch fish.
In this hobby,
but like with the layout.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, like you see a lot of the personality of someone in their layout, not just like the subject that they're modeling, because we're all different. And you look at a lot of layouts and you might have like two that are the same sort of area of the UP maybe, but there's two completely different takes on it because that's how different people sort of operate.
Oh yeah. Oh
so,
yeah. That's one of my favorite things about the hobby.
So yeah, because as we can see, like obviously my own Great Divide Railway, you've got Drayton and Southern, two people from two completely different places sort of doing the same thing with trains, but it's two completely different results.
Oh yeah. And still, two completely different things, but also the same thing. It's just kind of interesting. But yeah, I love it. I think it's a great hobby, and I think it's a great way for us to just explore the best of who we are. So, but yeah, so tell me a little bit about your railroad. I know you know about mine, which is one of the reasons why you invited me on. So I want to know a little bit about your railroad.
Well, right now I've got a couple of models sitting around. You've probably seen my Facebook page that I would have shown to everybody at some point. But I'm pretty much at the planning stage at the moment. There's a little section in the house that I've sort of looked at to be able to build something mostly for the channel. But there is the grand plan of the final layout, as it were.
Oh yeah.
And my previous podcast was pretty much on that, but unfortunately the audio's admittedly pretty bad. So if you can sit through it, thumbs up. But yeah, I'll probably redo that at some point. But this layout it's based around a railway I've pretty much been working on since I was about 5.
Okay. Wow.
I came up with like a first idea. I think I got a model railroad. No, it wasn't. It was a lifelike catalog out of the first train set that I got, and I found the Alco PAs in there. And there was a nice site on drawing. And at the time, as a little kid, I was hugely into drawing. So I drew up basically my copy of it and started coloring it in. And my first version of that was Queensland Mining Company, because I came from a little dusty dirt town called Mount Isa. That's about 1,200 kilometers from the coast. Sort of, if you look at Australia and sort of go around the middle in a large radius, it'll be somewhere near the middle. And I was born there. We lived in a small place called Charters Towers, which is about 130 k's from the coast. And that's mostly where these ideas came up. And my railway was from Townsville on the coast, which was going to be the port, to the mines at Mount Isa.
That's really cool.
Which is this Queensland Mining Company. So it seemed like a good name for it. And then it must have been something at school. I just remember getting absolutely fascinated with stupidly long names for things, which is kind of where the next name came from. So I sort of went, Queensland Mining Company, it's a bit generic. And I thought, Great Dividing Range Mining Company, fantastic. 5 long ass words. You can always, the acronym for it, GDRM Co. So it was just like full on pedantry going on there, but it stuck with me. I've had ideas for other things. I've wanted to model Queensland railways over the years. There's been a Northern Pacific idea that I've had floating around for a while, but the Great Divide's just hung on and hung on and hung on. And like even my father's asked me at random points, "Oh, is that Great Dividing Railway thing you're doing still doing it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, Dad. Like I've got models and stuff." Like, yeah. So I'm pretty much at a point where I'd I'd been doing it in N scale for years and years and years. Like I saw N scale as a little kid and I was like, "Yep, that's for me." And I stuck to that and just stubbornly stuck to that. And it was about 2012. I messaged a guy in the US on the Railwire. His name's Brian Kuhn, and he's in the Air Force, I believe.
Okay.
And he'd been traveling between like Germany and the US. And at the time, I think he was in the US. And I sent him a couple of Cato SD70Ms to paint. And these are the very first models that I ever got done. And since then, yeah, it was pretty much full steam ahead with N scale. I bought more SD70Ms. We got up to 9 of those that he ended up painting, and another 8 or 9 SD80 Max. Because this is all a iron ore hauling railway. So I was like, "Yep, I love the SD80s. They're perfect."
Yeah.
And yeah, we set about on that. And I ended up moving from the small town that I was living in to the big city just near a place called Ipswich outside Brisbane, which is the capital city of Queensland. And when I moved there, that was like my sort of late teenage years where everything got packed away. So I didn't really think of or do much about it other than drawings. I've been doing drawings on Microsoft Paint, Jesus, last 20 years, since about Windows 98.
That's awesome.
It's just easy. It's people have told me, "Oh, get on Photoshop, get on this, get on that," and it's no, I can have a drawing done like to a very, what I would say, presentable standard about half an hour.
That's
so
cool.
It was an easy way to just pump out ideas, which was a good and a bad thing at the time, because it was like I had all these ideas for, all right, locomotives and stuff. All right, I'll just blast out all these different drawings for different rosters that I've come up with. But I've ended up with like folders worth of like, I think one of them I was pushing about 2,000 drawings in just one folder. And obviously a real railway wouldn't have that much stuff. And I thought, this is getting a bit out of hand here. I've come up with a railway that's like 1,200 kilometers long. It's just something that I can't realistically model, because what I wanted to model was the mine to port sequence of iron ore railways. So going from loading at the mine, railing it to the port, unloading. And yeah, I came up with a 4-level layout at one point for N scale to try and get all of this in. And it's just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. But then sort of that went all dormant for a while, and those models were put away. So it wasn't something that was like, it was just out of sight, out of mind. And I kept coming around. I want to model something Australian. I want to have Australian stuff on my railway. But in Australia, we don't do N scale. It's not popular.
I was going to ask you about that.
Well, it's funny because the way the industry is kind of going from down here that I've watched, I might say things and then the comments will blow up being like, "You've got no idea." It's growing. I'll say that there's been a decent cottage industry behind it. There's a couple of ready to run models coming out soon, which is huge. There's already been a couple that have been done, but marketing and stuff, I'm going to get torn apart. They could probably do better.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't really see much sort of advertising out there, and it's only been recently that I've seen their stuff in shops. So it's kind of a chicken and a hen situation.
Yeah. Well, N scale is an interesting market here too. So
Yeah, I've heard, I was listening to a Modelers Life podcast with Jason Schron from Rapido, and he
Rapido,
was
yeah.
saying much the same stuff. They'll take a punt on something and it won't work, but something that they sort of didn't expect would be hugely popular. And I think it's a lot the same here, because at least from an end scale modeler's perspective, the best part of it was being able to run big modern trains. So if that's any insight, that's really
I
where I
think
was coming
that's
from with it.
I think to some degree that's how it is here too. I mean,
Mm.
in scale is it's by far, it's like maybe an eighth of the popularity, maybe 2/8 the popularity of HO. It's not anywhere close to HO in terms of popularity, but that being said, in recent years we've seen it become more popular. Like, for instance, my employer, I think a lot of what scale trains, and I don't mean to just constantly talk about scale trains, but I work there, so it's hard not to. But
We've got certain biases.
I do, just a little bit. But the stuff that we're doing in scale is really amazing. Just basically, it's like they took an HO scale rivet counter model and they shrunk it, and it's just amazing to see the
Yeah,
details, and you never would have in a
it's
million
wild to me to
years.
see the detail between like even the last 10 years. Like we
Mm-hmm.
had Cato as the main standard. And you kind of look at them today against something that would have come from scale trains, and it's night and day.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just unbelievable the amount of detail that you can get on something so small. Like,
Well, in Kato, they
uh,
definitely were the gold standard in N scale, and I think to some degree
mm,
they're still considered the standard. A lot of people really love Kato, but I know in recent years, just based on where I work, that N scale is becoming more and more popular because people can see, they're like, man, like I can have a locomotive that's just as detailed in N scale as HO, and I can run 100 car long coal train in my basement. Like there's a lot of people that see that, find it
yeah.
appealing. So me, I'm a shortline fan, so that's why I model what I model.
And that's funny, getting back to the Great Divide. I think in miles, it's around the 50-mile mark. It's
Okay.
about 80 kilometers long. So this is the Great Divide as it is today in HO scale, which is when I made the decision to go to that and scale, I just looked at it like either too much work or I'm just going to be waiting and waiting and waiting.
Mm-hmm.
So I went and purchased a couple of locomotives that were in almost a factory sort of livery, like one that would come from, like, if you went to EMD and said, look, we don't have an idea for what we want to paint this thing, what have you got?
Mm-hmm.
And I took those models and I sent them to a guy in New South Wales who he stripped the cab lettering off, redid the number boards, and we re-lettered them for Great Divide. And they've become GD01 to 04. And that's the original models. And that's the livery that I'm going to be using. It's just, it's quite easy, but I found it as sort of the lazy way to have something realistic looking,
Oh
which
yeah.
is something that I found you find with freelancing, there's a lot of comments like, when I'm getting started, what do I do for painting stuff? And normally my reaction's like, well, just look at the prototype, copy something that they've done.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
with this, I've literally done exactly that.
Well,
But
it
yeah,
it
that's the story
it
today. Yeah.
it gets difficult because, like, I really like what you're doing with your railroad, because it if you're like me, I don't have any talent when it comes to custom painting or anything like that. So
Oh yeah, I farm
you know,
everything out.
G and W, they're very everything is very corporate looking, and unfortunately, I picked a railroad that is very they're hard to get models of. Basically, the way that the model railroad industry works here in the United States is manufacturers like to make models that there are lots of. Now, granted, you're going to have road specific details and things like that, but the way that, at least at scale trains, for example, it's just something that I can relate to. We will look at locomotives the way that they were built. So like, let's say you have an SD40-2 that was built in 1974. We'll focus on the features of that run from 1974. And, you know, if there's like different handrails or different horn placement or different whatever, we can mess with those details. But basically what happens is like in the modern era, let's say you have an SD40-2. Well, that locomotive has been around for 45, approaching 50 years. And so there's a lot of different features on an SD40-2 that's added over its life. Maybe they've patched out a door, or they've put some Bondo on the short hood nose, you know, like, or they've moved the sand
You've got
filler
ditch lights
head.
added.
Yeah, ditch lights. I didn't even think
Air
about
cons.
that.
You have like fans that might have been mismatched during like the previous 2 or 3 owners that have had it, have serviced it. You might even have different trucks if it's like like a straight SD40, like high class, but the front lot, the back.
Well, and that's the challenge, because, you know, if we want to make a model that is prototypical right out of the box, it's got to have all the details correct. And so you run into challenging with tooling. And I don't know if you've had a chance to see it or not, but there is a video that Scale Trains put out called "How Model Trains Are Made," and it gives you an idea of how much is involved with tooling. And so, like, for somebody like me, and this is how it is for most people that model modern era short lines, is that you've got to custom paint everything and you have to custom build everything. And so I'm not very good at either of those things, but thankfully I have a couple friends who are, who I just send stuff to and say, please paint this orange.
You know, those guys where it's like you're hitting them with ideas over and over and over, and then you finally send them something, they're like, oh wait, you're serious?
Yes. Yeah, I know exactly what that's like.
The banging in the background, by the way, is just my dog trying to get into the room.
Nothing wrong with that. I've got a little rabbit running around on the floor. My wife just got a rabbit a few days ago and running all over the place. But yeah. So
my first thought just then was a small fluffy dog, but not an actual rabbit. Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. But yeah, so like with my short line, just to give you a little bit of my backstory, my great grandfather, he worked for the Southern Railway here in the United States. And I used to grow up hearing all these stories. My grandfather was the one that really got me into model trains. And he used to tell me these stories about his dad and how he got to run steam locomotives, diesel locomotives. And he'd been with the railroad for so long that he got to run this special locomotive, this green steam locomotive. And it's interesting that I'll circle back to that later, but all that got me interested in my family's history. So when I was 13, my grandfather took me to a steam locomotive festival in Michigan, and I was hooked. I was like, this is the hobby that I want to be part of. This is really cool. So I started looking even further into my family history, and long story short, I found out that my great grandfather got to run Southern Railway 4501, which is a really famous excursion.
I was actually about to ask when you said green steam locomotive. I was like 4501.
Yep, that's it. So when I found out that he got to run 4501, that was it for me. And I became really interested in Southern Railway naturally. And so, but my thing was, when it came to modeling, is I didn't grow up with Southern Railway. The railroad that I grew up with was Norfolk Southern. And so I liked the high hood locomotives a lot, but I couldn't really relate to the Southern that well because I just didn't grow up with it. So I was thinking, like,
that's
how
one of the things that I noticed looking through the photos on your Facebook page is you've got a lot of high hood locomotives along with a couple of Southern locomotives that have unfortunately been bogged.
Yeah, so that's kind of where the G&W idea hit me. So I I love Southern Railway, like I said, in the high hoods. And so my question was like, okay, how do I model Southern Railway in the modern era with ditch lights and things like that? So I started thinking about like short lines, and there was a short line in North Carolina that I really liked. And I can't think of the name of it right now for some reason, but anyway, they had a couple of high hood GP30s, and I also had some pictures of my great grandfather in a high hood GP30. So I was like, man, it'd be kind of cool if I had my own short line, and I could run a GP30 like this short line. And I was browsing around on Google, and I've always liked Genesee and Wyoming's paint scheme. I don't know how it is in Australia, but a lot of people here in the U.S. cannot stand G&W's paint scheme. Is that how it is in Australia?
A little bit in the same sort of way, yeah, because obviously they operate or have operated down here. They're now known as One Rail Australia. But yeah, we've had the black and orange stripes for since about 2003, 2004, I want to say. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they've pretty much been all over the place here.
I think the reason why people hate it so much here in the United States is because G&W, they'll buy all these little short lines, and then they'll take their unique paint schemes and just get rid of their unique identity. And I totally
I've
understand that. I
noticed
mean,
that as well. And sometimes, like, I've noticed that people have gone a little bit outraged when they'll buy a short line and then totally replace that short line's power. So these
mm-hmm,
fans of like these old locomotives that they love, they're just gone.
mm-hmm. Yep, you hit the nail on the head, and I think there's a lot of animosity towards them for that. But at the end of the day, they're a company, and they make decisions that benefit them and their employees and their shareholders, and so they just got to do what they got to do. And so my thing was, well, I wanted to be different, and no one really modeled G&W, and so I was like, it'd be kind of cool if my short line was a G&W railroad. Well, there's a railroad in Mississippi called the Columbus and Greenville, and they had several former Southern Railway high hoods, and G&W bought them, I want to say, in the mid 2000s, and like 2004, 5, 6, something like that. And for the longest time, they continued to operate those locomotives in their original paint scheme. So they had like a green and a yellow paint scheme and a red and a yellow paint scheme, and they're a pretty classy outfit. And so when G&W bought them, it wasn't until 5 or 6 years later until they actually started repainting stuff. And they had a locomotive. You can look it up on Google if you want to see a picture of it later, but it's a CAGY. That's the reporting mark, CAGY 2011. And they took one of those old high hoods and they painted it orange. And so it's one of the only G&W engines that I could find that has a high hood and was painted orange. And so when I saw that, I was like, that's it. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a bunch of high hood locomotives.
Done deal.
I can run it like it's the Southern Railway in the modern era. And then I discovered that G&W used to have railroads in Mexico, and they actually did, in fact, have high hood Southern Railway engines down there, like these junky old GE locomotives. So if you look at the cover photo on my DNS Facebook page, you'll see there's a high hood GP30 and a high hood U23B. And that U23B was inspired from the railroads in Mexico. So that's really kind of
it's amazing what the internet finds us, isn't it?
I know. It's like basically there's a prototype for everything.
It almost literally is. If you look hard enough, you'll find justification for just about anything.
Yeah, and see, and that's the thing. Like, I wanted to have a short line that was believable. I didn't want it to be this totally fantasized thing. Like, people see the G&W paint scheme, and that's something that they can relate to. Like Utah Belt, right? It doesn't exist in real life, but you look at it and you're like, well, man, that really probably could be a real railroad. Like, you know what I mean?
Well, if we look at the Utah Belt, you just break it down. It's a very basic gray, you've got the sill stripe, your normal sort of end railings that are the required safety color. And then in terms of the yellow, it's just the nose, just the end, and you've got some stripes. And this is like one of the things that I talked about in my previous podcast, but when you're coming up with a livery for a freelance railway, you kind of got, and you want it to be believable, you kind of got to look at what would a business do? All right, they wouldn't want to spend a huge amount of money. So you're looking at limited colors, you're looking at limited shapes. You're going to stick to a certain font because that's likely what they're going to have stencils for, and sort of stick to those sort of rules in a way, or standards, I guess. And then you fit the required stuff. Like in the US, you have to have, what is it, a yellow stripe or a red one? Or is it just depends?
You mean the safety striping?
Yeah.
It has to be a yellow reflective stripe.
So yeah, if you're modeling today, you throw in your yellow stripe, you do your safety railings and stuff, and you'd have something that's pretty realistic. Is as long as you're not like, I've seen on some of the Facebook pages some very artistic liveries, but it's not something that a railroad would have more than one of versus, a fleet.
Well, and it gets expensive. Like I know the owners of the Rock Island shortline that has kind of come back to life here in the United States, and it costs anywhere between $10,000 and $15,000 to paint one of their locomotives, and they have a pretty simple paint scheme. It's just white and blue,
Yeah, the white and blue unit, and I think they did a red and yellow.
They did, they very recently did. Yep.
So if we're going to talk numbers like that in Australia, if you're doing something similar, you're looking at about $70,000.
US or Australian?
That's Australian pesos. So it's probably similar numbers in America. No,
well, I think your currency
we're looking at what, 70 cents tradings.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's about 30%.
Yeah, it's still 40, 50 grand. Yeah.
Golly,
so
that's crazy.
But it's still a lot of money you've got to spend. And if you're buying secondhand, all of a sudden that becomes a large percentage of the cost.
Oh yeah.
So for a short line, you don't really want to be having really flashy stuff out there.
Well, and honestly, just being frank here, I don't know why G&W spends so much on paint. I really don't, because the cost involved, like we've been talking about, to paint, like some G&W locomotives, they paint the logos onto it with using stenciling, and other times
like
they're
just a normal patch.
Yeah, well, if you look at an orange G&W locomotive here in the US, sometimes it is actually a stencil that they paint onto the locomotive, but other times it's a decal. So it's like a big vinyl sticker that they put on the side of a locomotive, and that's a lot cheaper.
Yeah, they use the vinyls down here. I don't think any of them got painted, but yeah, they've got the big stickers because a lot of those faded or just got removed.
And I was just going to say something about that. So like, to be prototypical, this guy that makes my decals, Circus City decals here in Wisconsin, he actually made a faded G&W logo for me so that I can actually put on one locomotive just this really faded looking decal, because you see it in real life. So that's pretty cool. I didn't realize they did that down there too.
Yeah, no, I've actually used I used Matt for my decals as well.
Oh, really?
Actually. Yeah, he's one of those guys that's just, I found he was great to get along with. He was, I sent him the dimensions that I needed, sent him the fonts and everything, and I said, look, it's going to be about a half a page, if that, of decals. He's like, yep, no worries. Sends me the artwork about 10 minutes later. I was like, yep, that looks right. And then
that's awesome.
I got the decals in the mail a couple of weeks later, and then had a look. Yep, perfect. This is a guy in the US that I spoke to for all of about half an hour.
Yeah, he's amazing. I don't know how he does what he does, but he's very talented, and he's done a lot of really great work for me, for sure.
Yeah, he seems to be getting quite popular lately. I've heard his name pop up a lot around the place, actually, which
I
is
think
it's good to
his
see a bit of
turnaround
success.
time is one of the biggest things about his business. Like, you know, if you tell him you want something, he'll make it up for you, like you said, in about 30 minutes, and bam, you've got decals, and the same
Yeah,
day
it's
or the next day he'll
ridiculous the speed.
drop it in the post, and bam, you've got it. So that's cool. I can
Yeah,
it's
it's
really
almost like
neat.
next day for you guys in the US with him.
Almost, yeah. I can see. He's probably about a 12-hour drive from where I live. So I mean, it's within two days or so I can get it through the post. So, but
Yeah, which is ridiculous.
I was going to tell you the Australian manufacturer Oxygen. Man, I'm really, 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 really excited. Did I say really enough? For their
No, I think you missed two. We've got to have another two for the contract, otherwise we're gonna get sponsorship.
but
Who's sponsoring us? Are you kidding me?
well, I'm really, really excited for their CLF and CLP class. I've ordered 3 for my business train.
So which ones have you ordered?
Oh, let me go to their website really quick, because I can't quite remember
Because I
which
know
road
with the
numbers.
CLFs, I'm pretty sure they did just the one in the G&W full lettering, which would be CLF 5. And I think there's either 1 or 2 of the CLPs. I'm just going off the top of my head though.
Yeah, so let me see if I can find it. I'm trying to find it on their website. Sorry, you might have to edit this out. There we go. Okay.
Editing. It's editing.
I think it was CLF 5. I think I ordered 2 of those, and I think I'm gonna put my logo on them. And then let me see what the other one was.
For you guys, it's pretty much just you'd almost say it's like an F40C with a different nose.
And I got the 16, CLP 16. That's the other one that I got. So I'm just gonna.
I think that's the only other one they did. So yeah.
I'm just gonna take it and put my logos on it, and that's gonna be my business train power. So the Utah
Can't
Railway.
go wrong with the Bulldog.
No, not at all. The Utah Railway here in the United States, they're a G&W company, and G&W bought them around 2004, I think. And they actually have some Australian SD50s. And so looking at them, I'm like, well, you know, if Utah Railway can ship over some SD50s from Australia, then why can't I have some Bulldog locomotives on my railroad, you know?
I can give you more justification for that, because around the same time, those SD50S models, like S for shorter frame, you tell that by the radiators. The first grid's shorter in height than the second one. On those SD50s. But that's just anyway. Just getting a circular thought here. Minnesota Commercial, if you've ever heard of them, they ended up with a couple of C36-7s from the same railway, Hammersley Iron, at about the same time. Yeah, and I think it's either 1 or 2 that's still running today that they've got, and you can see it's got a larger fuel tank. I think it's still got the tropical roof, which is like a second skin over the top of the roof to give a little air insulation.
Which railroad is this?
Minnesota Commercial.
Minnesota Commercial.
I believe it's that. Should be red and black for the colors.
That is so cool. I did not know. know that.
A few of our iron ore stuffs ended up over there. Like recently, BHP sold off the first 13 SD70 Aces that they have, and I think 4 have ended up on Montana Rail Link.
Wow.
And another 2 or 4 ended up on Quebec North Shore and Labrador. And there's another little railway up there. I think it's either like CFAQ or something like that. They've ended up with another couple as well.
Hmm.
But yeah, those locomotives, they went straight back to the US as soon as BHP sold them. They went on a boat and off they went.
Well, it makes me feel better because, like that's what I mean. Like I always want to try to have a believable short line. And is it the most believable thing to have bulldog locomotives on my railroad? Probably not, but it's there's a justification for it. If they can send the SD50s, they
Well,
can
look,
send.
yeah, yeah. If you show it with the money, it's the golden rule. The gold was the guy who makes the rules.
Yep. Yep.
So yeah, if your president wants to see himself behind some sleek-looking power on his business train riding over his very short railway, it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Because the
Why not?
was it Iowa Pacific, I believe it was, that had the Illinois Central E8s. I think that was a similar sort of thing. The owner just wanted to have them.
I'll have to send you a video that I did. I actually got to interview Ed Ellis back in 2015. They actually ran a passenger train in partnership with Amtrak, and it was Amtrak train crews, but all the equipment was the vintage Illinois Central equipment.
Because
They
that was
never
all the
ran.
brown and orange,
Yeah, they never
chocolate and
ran the
orange, I
E
should say.
units.
Yeah.
Yeah, they never ran the E units on that train. They wanted to, but it just kind of never happened. But I did get to interview him. But yeah, that was kind of his dream. He always wanted to recreate the Illinois Central, and I know a few people that worked for his companies, and they had a lot of financial troubles and didn't necessarily make the best business decisions all the time, and a lot of people kind of got hurt by
Oh,
that.
those SD90s.
Yeah, right. But
Why?
makes you wonder. But so his dream, he actually bought the Illinois Central, the original route of the Illinois Central that he grew up on, and unfortunately, they weren't able to keep it around. He bought it several years ago and sold it like 2 years ago, and it's unfortunate to see that happen. But you're like what you're saying. If there's somebody that wants to have a good looking locomotive on their railroad, they can get it if they really want it.
That's exactly it. I think even I went almost that far. I've had, like, as we all have had, different models over the years, but there was a company here that made those same CLFs, CLPs, and the original CLs at one point. I
Oh,
think
really?
I've owned about four. Yeah, I've owned about four since they came out. None of them at the same time. And I sold the most recent one last year. But that was always the same idea. I just wanted a nice, like a modern bulldog sort of locomotive to haul the executive train. Because it's like F7 seem a bit old and they're not really from down here. So let's go with the next best thing. And if you're looking at the CLP page, you'll see the green, yellow, and silver ones. That's probably one of the best liveries to come out of this country by far. It's just whoever came up with it was smoking the good stuff.
Yeah, it looks beautiful just from the rendering here. It does. It looks really good. One of these days, I really want to visit Australia. One day, it's gonna have to be several years from now when I actually have the money to do it. But one day, I would really like to.
Oh, you've got to watch out. Like, obviously, you're going to be quite a rich man down here because our dollar's worth nothing. But you've got to watch out for like the spiders, snakes, birds, drop bears, and
Wow.
there's bogans as well that you got to. It's not really that bad, but a lot of the time, yeah, it's a nice place, definitely, and we've definitely got some really interesting sort of prototypes, I guess you could say, locations to come down and have a look at. Like for me, I grew up along, it's called the Great Northern Railway as the name of the rail line, but it was originally built by Queensland Railways, and it's the line to Mount Isa from Townsville. It's the real one. And that's 3 foot 6 inch gauge. So pretty much all of Queensland is narrow gauge apart from a short little bit that goes into Brisbane. And I pretty much grew up my whole life looking at this. And a lot of the time you'd think like, yeah, I'd probably model that, but at the same time, not really, because it wasn't hugely interesting to me other than trains. Like at the time I was a kid and I was reading US magazines and I started calling things like you'd say like the Clydes that we had down here, which is like an EMD. I was calling them, oh look, that's an SD40. No, not even close. But you know, as a kid, I thought, yep, that's what that is. Oh,
That's
the
what
C
that
something
is,
different.
yeah.
I don't recognize that. I'm gonna have to go read these magazines, but I was reading the wrong places and had the wrong ideas.
Oh, that's
But
cool. Like often when we're kids, we have very big imaginations.
yeah, and it gets filled quite easily, and I think it's probably one of the things that shouldn't be oh Jesus Christ, I'm losing words here. One of those things that should be propped up more, I guess, promoted
Yeah.
more in kids, because we're losing a lot of creativity these days in some areas, and it's like you see the kids that come through, especially in this hobby, that are on computers and they're on things like Trains or Microsoft Train Simulator, and they're on there coming up with like things that would have blown me away when I was playing games for the first time, like with a PlayStation or an Xbox. And like, well, back then I thought, wow, these graphics are amazing. And then I see these things these like literal kids are coming up with. And I'm looking at like, God, I'm old, but God, that's amazing. Like, if I could have done that when I was young, holy moly, would things be different? But I'm on paint and these kids are like on another planet.
Yeah. No, I agree. And you know, that's one of the things that people tell us all the time at Scale Trains, like, you know, oh, you know, it's just a dying hobby, you know, and the thing is we don't really see any evidence of that. I mean, it's a changing hobby. What young people want in you know, and I fall into that age category, right? You know, I'm 25, but I also know a lot of people that are teenagers who really want all the lighting features, want all the sound features, and that's really one of the ways that I think that we're going to be able to move the hobby forward is having those lights, sounds, because we're competing, if you think about it, directly with these train simulators, directly with cell phones. I mean, people spend so much time on their phones, and it's like, do they really have time or want to spend money on a hobby, or even Xbox, right? Just regular Xbox games.
Yeah.
But the way that we, I think, can go head to head with that is offering locomotives in a way that they are animated. They have, you know, whether they have you know, ditch lights that flash, or you know, wheel clank or wheel squeal as they go around a curve. Like it's just those animations and those features. Like for instance, I'll give you another example: the big blow turbine that Scale Trains makes. It has a spinning fan in it.
Tough.
You know what I mean? So like that
Yeah,
gets
I've
people
drilled
really
over
excited.
videos of that. Like, tried to justify how I can get myself one, but at the moment, it's funny because it's slightly off topic to it, but you look at pokey machines. I'm not slot machines, I guess you'd say in the US,
Yeah.
with all the lights and sounds and it makes noises and things. You've almost taken the same sort of the way it gets people and doing it with trains, like the lights, the sounds. It has all these things that'll captivate people and sort of want them to get it. Sort of the same way that pokies will keep people sitting there throwing money into it because it's lights and sounds and you know you can get it to do things.
Right. Well, it's kind of like social media, right? With the algorithms that they use, they want to keep you on their website as long as they possibly can. And we want to keep people running model trains as long as we can. But the thing is like we were talking about earlier, it is a creative hobby. It's a constructive hobby. It's a hobby that brings out the best in people. And so unlike a cell phone,
Definitely.
Unlike a video game, you're creating something. You're part of your own story. And I think that's what really makes model railroading special. So, but I got to hop off here. I've got some things that I got to take care of today. But I just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to be on your show.
Noticed, yeah.
And I would love to do it again, and
thank you
would
for
love
coming
to
on.
continue. Yeah.
I think, as we look, obviously, with your own DNS coming like down the line, there's going to be updates and things, and I'll have things to talk about. And yeah, it'd be definitely great to have you back.
Well, one day when I get a layout, I'll have a lot more to talk about. Right now, I'm in a 2-bedroom apartment, and hopefully we'll be getting a house in a year or two, and then maybe I can start building a layout in a couple more years after that. So we'll see.
A house or a basement with a shelter?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, here in Tennessee, it's really important to have a basement because we have tornadoes really bad, especially where we are. My wife, when she was a little girl, she actually survived a tornado, and there were several people on the road that she grew up with that died. And so basements down here are important because if you've got a tornado, that's where you want to be. But I can say, well, it's for safety, but also a giant model railroad.
Yeah, priorities, that's it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much, and hope you have a great day. Actually, you're going to bed.
No, I've got Chris Palmieri to interview next, and then it's bed.
Well, it's Friday,
I think
so
I've
at
got a
least
little
you get to
break
sleep in.
between that. That's exactly it. I got Saturday to waste.
There you go. There you go. Well, thanks again, and I'll chat with you soon.
No worries. Thank you, Drayton.
See you later.